I'm so humbled and honored by your invitation to be here today and think through these things with you. I had a whole talk prepared, but listening to Faith Rivera sing, I forgot everything I know. And I'll just go from scratch here. We'll come up. No, I have this little thing here. So I'll pull that out. Yeah. Wow. William James said that it's difficult to talk about consciousness. It's difficult to ask into or inquire into what is thinking, what is consciousness. He says studying consciousness is like trying to understand a dark room by turning on the light. And the very act of inquiry obliterates the thing you're trying to inquire into, right? So it's like trying to see your own eyes. If I asked you right now to see your own eyes and you just sort of went, you can't do it because you use your eyes to see. So the subject, the theme this month here at Vision, of course, is mindfulness. And it's a term we often associate with Buddhism, with the Eightfold Path. It's number 7 on the Eightfold Path. Buddha says that we should practice mindfulness, and for him that means something like gently monitoring and shaping mental content. Simply becoming aware of your thoughts. And as soon as you do that, you also experience a very important truth that we're going to think about this morning. As soon as you begin to observe your thoughts, you laugh and realize the fact that I can observe my thoughts means that I am not my thoughts. Boom, done. That's it. I'll see you next week. No, there is no one, you don't need to read any books to demonstrate this. No learned authors or philosophers need to explain this to you with passionate arguments. The instant you experience this ability to observe your thoughts or go into what Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita calls the inner witness, you know that your thoughts are an important part of what you are, but they are not you. And that there is a deeper you that can actually observe your thoughts, shape your thoughts, and so on. So that's what Buddha tends to mean by mindfulness, is that practice of simply talking about yourself in third person. Oh, look at Peter Bolland, he's getting angry right now. And boom, you're in it. You're in that deeper awareness, thinking about your thoughts. And when we meditate together, we of course practice tapping into that boundless awareness that resides beneath the thought stream. So mindfulness means a lot of things, and it also means coming out of conditioned consciousness, coming out of reactivity, and coming into freedom and joy and awareness. So as I was preparing for this morning, I kept thinking about a Buddhist philosopher called Nagarjuna. And he lived in the 1st century, right after Jesus, 150, 200, around then in India. And Nagarjuna thought that we ought to maybe make a helpful distinction between 2 levels of knowing. The lower level of knowing that we normally are always doing, that he calls that ordinary knowing. So we want to talk about what that is. And then he suggests there's a higher level of knowing. The Sanskrit word is prajna, and it means transcendent knowing or a different order of awareness that we don't spend very much time in. So I want to think about those 2 things. Have you noticed, let's start always with our own experience here. Have you noticed that your thinking only gets you so far? Wayne Dyer writes about his own recovery from alcoholism, and he talks about the first AA meeting he ever went to, and he said on the wall there was a sign that a lot of people in recovery are familiar with, and it said, "My best thinking got me here." I think it's in his book called Intention. He used to order 2 beers when he went to dinner with his family. 2 beers. One, bam, down the hatch, and the second one he can enjoy a little more slowly. Then he realized, I think something's amiss here. But this isn't an AA meeting, so let's get back to the other thing. But that interesting ability to observe yourself caught in destructive patterns, that's mindfulness. Now, what to do about it, that's a whole other thing. But noticing is such a huge step because the very observation, the very act of awareness begins to heal and repair, bringing this stuff out of the darkness. And have you also noticed that your mind, with its concepts and opinions and limited understanding, it points you in certain directions, but it never seems to get you all the way there. We all have lots of plans and aspirations and intentions, and then there's the way our life actually is. So thinking, we have to just be careful here. It's a great tool, but it's obviously not the only game in town, this thing called thinking. And have you also noticed that your deepest, truest insights seem to come up from somewhere other than thinking? Have you noticed that in meditation you seem to access a different realm of awareness, not bound by conceptual thought? And this is a perfect room to think about this. Those of us who practice mindfulness and meditation and contemplative prayer and are open to the possibility that consciousness is a lot more than just surface thoughts. We only have to check in with our own experience to see how some of this starts to happen. There's a wonderful Zen Buddhist story about a master who was traveling, and he went to visit a monastery, and he went into the courtyard of the monastery, and it was a windy day, and there were two monks in the center of the courtyard looking up at the flag. And they were arguing about the flag. One monk said, "The flag is flapping in the wind." And the other monk said, no, it is the wind that is flapping around the flag. And they saw the Zen master and they said, "Would you come over here and adjudicate our discussion? My friend, I say that the flag is flapping in the wind, but my friend here says, no, it is the wind that is flapping around the flag." And so the master thought carefully for a moment, and then he said, "It is the minds of the two brothers that are flapping." Reminds me of most of the Facebook arguments I get into. Like the one last night. Oh my God. Ruined my Saturday night. So according to Nagarjuna, there are two ways of knowing. And ordinary knowledge, the lower form of knowing, is what those two Zen monks were doing. It's really useful, but it's involved a lot with naming the world and marrying to concepts and becoming increasingly calcified in your opinions, and then the arguments start, right? So first of all, let's talk about ordinary knowing. It is conceptual thought. It is names and forms. It is bound by logic and reasoning and analogies. Ordinary knowledge always compares something to something else, and so there's a lot of analogous thinking. So every new experience gets kind of Google searched and put into a box because that piece of rope on the ground looks kind of like a snake, so it must be a snake. Conceptual thought then kind of forces the uncarved whole of reality into whatever preconceived categorization system we currently hold. So ordinary knowing or ordinary thinking is obviously a hugely powerful tool, but it's highly limited. It locks us into an illusion, namely, that reality is composed of myriad separate things in conflict with each other. That's the world ordinary knowing reveals to us. And then there's transcendent knowledge, or again, prajna. And prajna is an entirely different order of knowing, and it really bears little resemblance to ordinary knowing. It's not just knowing more. So in prajna, or in transcendent knowledge, we do not use concepts and we do not use words. We do not use ideas. Instead of reason and logic, we use intuition, gut sense. We move into non-conceptual awareness. Ordinary knowledge has lots of content: theories, doctrines, explanations, concepts, ideologies. Transcendent knowledge is content-free. Now, again, we're doing something impossible this morning. We're trying to discuss prajna from the level of ordinary knowledge. I'm using words, we're all, concept. What the hell is concept-free? Yeah. So it's hard to figure out from the ordinary mind what we're even pointing to. That's why ultimate reality is, in all the wisdom traditions, ineffable. Beyond thought, the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. In Judaism, God is the mystery of mysteries. In the Quran, Allah has 99 names, Allah the merciful, Allah the judgmental. But in the mystical tradition of Islam, the true name of God is the 100th name, which is silence. So words and concepts in Zen Buddhism are fingers pointing at the moon. And only an idiot would confuse this finger with the moon. So ineffability has to be built in, and Nagarjuna nails it when he suggests that you already embody these two ways of knowing, but they aren't talking to each other very well. Ordinary knowledge can never understand transcendent knowledge, but you can experience transcendent knowledge, and you do. You can embody prajna, but you cannot bring it back down into the level of ordinary knowledge, clothe it in names and forms, and then turn it into a doctrine or an ideology. So the great teachings involve a lot of silence and a lot of emptiness and a lot of metaphors and analogies, just kind of pointing to it. So prajna, or transcendent knowledge, is experiential. It's something you embody, not something you think. Direct, unmediated seeing into the depth of the mystery, without the corroding and distorting mediating process of reducing experience down into mere concepts and relational ideas. This is the one teaching of all the mystical traditions. And what attracted Ernst Holmes to Eastern traditions in Hinduism in Los Angeles when he was studying there and coming up was something that he only saw in a less clarified way in his study of the New Testament. And that was the explicit acknowledgement that thinking can never touch the infinite. Only awareness can. And if you're willing to separate thinking from awareness with me, and I admit those are two categories that exist in ordinary knowledge, but at least with awareness, we start to get closer to something that's unbound by concepts. Maybe this is what Jesus meant when he said, "Until you see again as a child, you will not enter into the kingdom of heaven." We don't know exactly what he meant by see again as a child. I doubt it meant from 3 feet off the ground. It must have meant something about the unformed fluidity of imaginative childhood consciousness. Maybe this is the condition of consciousness, this prajna, that we had in the mythical Garden of Eden, when we did not yet know the difference between anything. We didn't know the opposites, polarities, and dualities of the world, life and death, good and bad. We did not yet have that knowledge that we gained from the tree of knowledge. And we walked, Genesis says, in the cool of the evening with God. And we didn't know that we were different from each other. We didn't know that we were different from God. We didn't know that there was a difference between anything. And then, of course, we ate the fruit of the differences between all of the things, and we were cast out of that paradise into the world of awareness of all the differences and all the suffering that comes from it. And maybe this is the purpose of all mythology, to cast us out of the ordinary world of things in conflict with each other and into this mythical, timeless space in a land far, far away where there's a magical consciousness. Mythology is very effective at throwing us into the deep end of our own unconscious and the realm of the archetypes. And so religion often relies, religious systems, religious traditions rely on mythology, of course, because it's a powerful medium to throw you out of your discursive, ordinary thinking into a kind of boundlessness. So let's get a little more concrete if we can. Here's an example of transcendent knowledge, or prajna, or at least the best we can do here at the level of ordinary knowledge. Let's talk about a whirlpool in a river, an eddy. So when you come upon a river on a hike, and there's an elbow in the riverbed, and the water is swirling in a whirlpool there, we call it a whirlpool. And it's beautiful, and maybe you're attracted to it, and you think, that would make a nice water feature in my garden. Let me just get my arms and grab that whirlpool and bring it back to my yard and put it in my garden. Obviously, that's not going to work. In fact, the word whirlpool is a lie. It is more aptly called a whirlpooling. So now, for you English majors, we're getting to the difference between nouns and verbs. Look at how our language distorts the impermanent transformational quality of all phenomena by pinning it down into nouns. That whirlpool cannot exist independent of the million things that are a giving cause to its arising. The river, or should I call it a rivering? The rivering is whirlpooling. And Peter Bolland, or should I call it Peter Bollanding, is noticing the whirlpooling in the rivering. So by turning every noun into a verb, try that the rest of the day. Just inside, you don't want to sound crazy, but you will notice how imprisoned we are by our language system, which is a reflection, a codification of our thought system. By turning all of this fluidity into a fixed, realm of nouns, we are distorting what is actually happening. So it's interesting when you study other languages like Navajo, the language spoken by, as they call themselves, the Diné, the people. The Athabascan tribes that live southern Utah, northern New Mexico, northern Arizona, the Shiprock area there, the Navajo. When you study their language, you realize that it has, I don't know Navajo, I read an article about it, but you realize that that language has almost no nouns, almost none, and is instead composed almost entirely of verbs. Everything is, as I just said, a river is a rivering, a whirlpool is a whirlpooling, a tree is a treeing. There are over 500,000 distinct conjugations of the verb to go. There are over 500,000 distinct verb conjugations of to see. So everything becomes fluid. So this is what the Buddhists call the emptiness of all forms. That all forms are empty in this sense that they are unfixed and part of a fluid process of arising and fading. So this is what prajna understands. This is what transcendent knowledge sees, is this fluidity, this shunyata, which is the Sanskrit word for this emptiness. And that's why Buddhism teaches us that all things arise in a vast and interconnected field of mutual causation. Nothing has a single cause. This isn't dominoes knocking down other dominoes. Everything that arises, every event, every object has many mothers, has many causes. And all of those causes themselves have many causes. So the whole world is arising at the same time, mutually. Everything causes everything else. Everyone is responsible for everything, and no one is entirely to blame for everything. This is what prajna knows. All matter, all energy, all consciousness, and all action exists in one single interwoven phenomenal field that, in traditions, in the West we often simply call God. So life is a verb and not a noun. So in transcendent knowledge, then, we break free from the prison of our own conceptual mind, and we see finally in glimpses things as they really are, as fluid and deeply interconnected. And then when we follow that, we see that with these insights in place, we begin to realize that ultimately there is no separation between anything. And that our interests are inextricably interwoven into the interests of everyone and everything else. And a deep empathy begins to replace our small-minded self-interest. There is no me, I, or mine. There's no room for that anymore. That makes sense in a way. You know, I have a name. I have a social security number, although I got a letter from the IRS last week saying, your tax return is incomplete. Could you please send some more stuff? And then I realized I had not yet filed my tax return. My social security number and identity has been stolen. And someone filed a tax return under my name and my social with both the Franchise Tax Board and the IRS. This happens to thousands and thousands of us every tax season by these cyber criminals who fire off all these fake returns hoping to get some return checks. So I spent hours and hours and hours on the phone with the IRS and the Franchise Tax Board and Social Security and calling all credit reporting bureaus, placing 90-day hold. You don't want to hear all this. We came here to get peace. But I tell you what, it's a war out there too. So now I got to figure out how to have peace in the battlefield, because I don't get to live in a retreat center. That'd be nice. I want to just live here, Patty, all week. If I could just stay here, whenever things get hard, I'll just ring the bowl. There's a Jack in the Box right over there. I'll just go over there and get some food. So I have an identity and it's useful, and sometimes, things go wrong. But in this deeper level of prajna, I know that all of those are, in a sense, provisional. I don't want to say fictional, because this isn't fake. This is all very real. But they're provisional, and there's more. So this is what it means then, that compassion then, once I recognize my interconnectedness, then the compassion and the empathy arise. So it is that compassion is a natural byproduct of prajna. When I see the absolute bedrock truth of the oneness and interconnectedness of all matter, energy, and consciousness and action, then I realize I am all of this, and all of this is me, and then compassion is the only logical outcome. So when you are wise, you are automatically compassionate, and when you are compassionate, you are automatically wise. Compassion and wisdom, or karuna and prajna, are linked by a diamond-hard bond. And that's what Tibetan Buddhism teaches. The name of Tibetan Buddhism is Vajrayana, and Vajra means diamond. And the diamond refers to the unimpeachable solidity of the connection between compassion and wisdom. When you have one, you have the other, period. If one's missing, you don't have either of them, right? So in those moments when I'm not compassionate, like when I wanted to strangle whoever it is that stole my identity, I know that I've lost also my prajna, and I'm back in the world of suffering. And this too is all what it means to be mindful. That mindfulness is that state in which all of this insight replaces our normal conditioned consciousness. For when we believe mistakenly that we are separate, isolated entities in conflict with each other and with the larger forces around us, then we live in perpetual fear and craving, in other words, suffering, dukkha. So it is that ordinary knowledge makes possible all of the conflicts that plague us, from within and from without. We see a tiny slice of the world and we mistake it for the whole. Nothing has a single cause. and all of our arguments on Facebook and everywhere else about the shooting in Ferguson reveal how brutally imprisoned we are by ordinary knowledge. All of us went, when we learned about the shooting in Ferguson, all of us went scurrying off to our usual handy answers. And it's clear from a Buddhist perspective that terrible afternoon in Ferguson had an infinite number of causes. And that it's never as simple as, well, it's caused by this, or it's caused by that, or it's this guy's fault, or it's that guy's fault. If he'd only done something different, da-da-da-da. Yes, all of that, guess what? All of those causes created that horrible moment. And there's a victim on both sides of the gun in all of these shootings. And all of us are bound up in the causation of what happened in Ferguson. And yet look at how tempting it is to run off into the arms of simple answers. You know, there's a great story in Buddhism called the blind men and the elephant. These blind philosophers were arguing about the nature of reality, and so they came to the Buddha. They heard he could help them, and the Buddha said, "Sure, I can help you." And he had these blind philosophers led out into the courtyard around an elephant, and they weren't told it was an elephant, and they led each one up to a different part. And then Buddha asked each of these philosophers, "What is this thing?" And the guy that had the tail said, "It's a rope." And the guy that had the legs said, "Oh, it's a tree trunk." And the guy that had the belly of the elephant said, "No, it's a giant boulder." And the guy that had the ear said, "No, it's a huge leaf." And the guy that had the tusk said, "No, it's a cold steel spear." And the guy that had the trunk said, "No, it's a giant snake." And Buddha turned to his company and said, "See, this is what we do when we claim to define the world. We are talking about nothing but our own tiny subjective slice of the perceptual field. We are drunk on ordinary knowledge, and we think that our perceptions and opinions are true for everyone. And that's where all the wars come from. That's where all the arguments in our families come from. All of the pain of the world comes from our slavish attachment to our opinions about things. So Buddha's making a pretty powerful argument, like that African proverb. Each of us is stuck down a well, and we look up and we see that tiny blue dot, and we mistake that dot for the whole of the sky. This is why meditation is so important. This is why meditation is the answer. Not more words, not more doctrines, not more teachings, not more books. It's tough for writers to say this, but maybe you don't need to read any more books. Except, go ahead and buy them at the bookstore out here, but then just give them away. That's why meditation matters so much, because it is the best opportunity to tap into that boundless awareness of prajna. Now, meditation is not the only way, because prajna is going to break through on its own sometimes. In that beautiful moonrise, in that moment of mirth and laughter and freedom that just comes along sometimes, when you hear beautiful music. And there are lots of ways to meditate. I was reading about Alan Watts and Joseph Campbell yesterday, two of my favorite gurus, and Alan Watts one time asked Joseph Campbell, what's your technique for meditation? What kind of meditation do you do? Joseph Campbell said, "I underline sentences." He just reads, that whole scholarly thing, he reads books and underlines them. That's his meditative practice. So this is why Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching said, "My teachings are easy to understand and easy to put into practice. Your intellect will never grasp them." And he also said in the Tao Te Ching, "I have just 3 things to teach: simplicity, patience, and compassion." So maybe it's okay if we stop relying on the mind to figure everything out, because the mind is never going to figure everything out. Am I suggesting anti-intellectualism? No. Do I recommend that we all become dumbasses? I already am, so mission accomplished. But you don't have to know what to do, but you can move into wisdom anyway, because from this perspective of ordinary knowledge and transcendent knowledge, it's clear now that wisdom has little to do with concepts. Wisdom has little to do with intellectual understanding. Wisdom is not something you know, it's something you are. Wisdom is not yet another theory or more knowledge. Wisdom is a way of being in the world. And all of the wisdom traditions in the world tell us that we are already that. We are at core identical with the sacred ground of being. And so in a sense, there's nothing to be done but to come into contact of that direct experience through meditation, through Sangha, this community. We come into this room to experience prajna, to just slow down and stop for a minute so it has a chance to catch up with us. So maybe it's easier than we think, as my friend Ann Day often says to me when I am complaining to her about the difficulties of my life. She says, allow it to be easy. So I'll leave you with that. That's our takeaway. Allow it to be easy. Namaste. Thank you.